Welcome to the Target stream for Mint Press News. I'm your host, Robert Inlakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us today. So, Iran and the US are back at it again, trading blows. The Yemen-Saudi war escalates. Tehran has accused Israel now of committing a false flag attack against Egypt, which is now being blamed on the Iranians also. And Iran is using new hybrid missile capabilities. And Saudi Arabia teamed up with the United States since the last time we've done a stream on here to attack Iraq. And of course, there are threats that the Iraqi resistance factions are going to respond. Of course, there's a lot more as well that can be covered. We'll also look at Lebanon today and what's going on across the region, enormous developments. But before we do begin getting into all of that, the Target stream is 100% viewer funded. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal, and our fundraisers were taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They even withheld our funds. So we are looking for 300 new members to make sure that we can keep this news show alive. And you can join Mint Press on Patreon or right here on our YouTube membership program. And with that being said, there's quite a bit to get into today. There's some evidence that has emerged recently of what Iran has been striking in Jordan. Iran, of course, has claimed that they have taken out 3 F-35 fighter jets while they were still on the ground in Muwafaq al-Sulti air base in Jordan. The United States CENTCOM, or as I like to call them, COPCOM, claimed that not only did they lose no aircraft whatsoever, but no missiles even hit their target. And they claimed this the last time Iran launched a strike, which sort of led to another round of escalation. And there is actually video evidence of those missiles hitting and photos as well of big plumes of smoke. And we'll pull them up actually. Here's one of the strikes from the initial Iranian attack on US forces. They claimed that they struck initially, this is the IRGC, they claimed that they were targeting a headquarters for CENTCOM in the region and that they hit it directly. This is one of the images that emerged of a big plume of smoke. And there were also many videos where Iranian ballistic missiles could be seen evading the air defense systems. On the note of the air defenses, there have recently been some assessments done of how many air defense munitions are still in existence that could be possibly used to protect US troops and, of course, the Israelis. We'll pull them up on screen now. So, of course, these are Patriot and THAAD interceptors. And as you can see, these THAAD interceptor missiles, by the way, the majority of them now will be based in occupied Palestine in Israeli-held territory. So in terms of their ability with these interceptors to actually catch Iranian ballistic missiles that are heading towards US forces, that's significantly degraded. Of course, Israel also has its David Sling air defense system, its Arrow 1 and 2 air defenses as well, which come into play. I've heard people say Iron Dome, but Iron Dome is invented for rockets, not for ballistic missiles. And it's attempted to shoot down drones, but it is not effective at shooting down drones. It's effective for shooting down rockets, which are on a fixed trajectory. But as you can see, those numbers are now dwindling, the amount that they have in reserve. Iran as well has been going after radars, which again, not only the IRGC, but the Iranian army, because the army and the IRGC, even though they are, of course, functioning together, they operate separately. And this is something we've seen throughout the war, actually, is that the IRGC makes separate statements to the army. So the army launches its own drone and missile operations. Just to pull up here, here are a map of the US strikes that you can see here, those red dots on Iranian targets, which took place last night. They targeted civilian infrastructure. They wiped out an Iranian family a taxi driver, his wife, and son, I believe who was 2 years old, were killed in Qashim Island, which we've sort of focused on quite a bit in these episodes. But in retaliation, there were attacks on U.S. forces in Jordan and in Kuwait, but also the Iranian army, and that's why I'm mentioning them. The Iranian army announced that they targeted the Sheikh Issa base in Bahrain with a wave of drones, and that they took out radars and I think generators and a number of different targets on that inside of that base. And that's a base that the U.S. withdrew its forces to because of the fact that the Fifth Fleet base was basically blown to bits and became unoperational. Like they couldn't operate from it effectively anymore. But here is some scenes from Qashim Island of the mission to pull Iranian civilian bodies from the rubble. According to reports, there were 2 children that were injured and pulled out of the rubble last night from these strikes, which did hit civilian infrastructure. But unfortunately, a family of 3 were killed in the strikes. Here's some footage of what that looked like, of Iranian civilians driving and passing by. Of course, the United States announced this as if it was, something earth-shattering and it was going to change the equation. And that's just not the case, because as we're seeing right now, the entire region is igniting. Iran is not only battering U.S. bases and continues to do this, and it's obvious that Iran is okay with this tit-for-tat fighting, because in the last round, it acted somewhat preemptively. And the satellite imagery that we're now getting out of the military bases struck by the Iranians does indicate that they are hitting with pinpoint precision. And so we have some of them here. This is, again, Muwafaq Sulti base in Jordan. And as you can see, there are those scorch marks. So because the images are such low resolution, we can't obviously confirm exactly what was hit. Iran claimed that they were targeting F-35 fighter jets. They also claimed to have taken out an enormous amount of drones as well before this, including, I believe, around a dozen MQ-9 drones. That was about a week ago that they announced that. So they have been actually taking out, which indicates, by the way, that they have live intelligence and that they have, in fact, adapted. Another thing which is interesting to see, and some different analysts and channels have pointed out, that the Iranians are actually using these hybrid missiles where they're attaching the body of cheaper missiles, and the warhead is of a more advanced Iranian missile. And it appears that they've been using this strategy. So the whole point of this is that the lethality of these missiles remains the same, except they cost a lot less, right? So they can take one of these Khaybar Shekan or Hajj Qasim and mount them on top of a Hajj Qasim booster, and it's going to be relatively cheap for them to do this, and enables them, of course, to do it safely still. So that's something that we're seeing in terms of a development on the military front here. And of course, Donald Trump is threatening to launch more strikes in retaliation to anything Iran does. Iran is, again, vowing that it will retaliate to anything that is done to it. And in the meantime, we had something very interesting emerge. Donald Trump, as he has delivered many different speeches, made an interesting admission, which I think perhaps we should all listen to.
Because the United States can't take care of daycare. That has to be up to a state. We can't take care of daycare. We're a big country. We have 50 states. We have all these other people. We're fighting wars. We can't take care of daycare. You got to let a state take care of daycare, and they should pay for it, too. They should pay. They have to raise their taxes, but they should pay for it. And we could lower our taxes a little bit to them to make up, but it's not possible for us to take care of daycare. Medicaid, Medicare, all these individual things, they can do it on a state basis. You can't do it on a federal. We have to take care of one thing, military protection.
Well, I mean, there it is. So you can't have healthcare, you can't have daycare, but you can have the war for Israel. You could definitely have that, guys. So, be happy with what you're getting. Those ballistic missiles that are heading your way, which we're watching now on screen, the latest of them that have been launched, the latest video that Iran released of its ballistic missiles being launched. You can have the ballistic missiles on your bases, killing your soldiers, and your soldiers can die for Israel. And you can spend billions in pointless wars. You can escalate against Yemen. You can continue supplying missiles so that Israel can commit a genocide against innocent civilians in Gaza. You can do nation building, and you can try and replace the United Nations and manage all of these wars and conflicts for Israel, right? You can do that, but you cannot provide healthcare for your people. Very interesting. Very interesting. So yeah, these missiles are this is what the American people have to be, thankful for, that their soldiers can be in a war fought for another country's interests, and their soldiers are subjected to strikes like these out of the horse's mouth. And we've seen that there's a lot in the way of evidence. And just to get back to it, some of the satellite imagery that we have here, just so we can pull this up, some of this that has been released since. This is the Ali Salim Air Base in Kuwait that was struck. And again, you can see those scorch marks there. These are not high resolution images, but we can still see that that something indeed has been struck. And also, some of these attacks, the aftermath is often confirmed by NASA firms that detect fires burning out of these locations. Or, of course, we get that visual confirmation. But in almost all of these cases, CENTCOM or COPCOM released these statements like claim, false, against whatever Iran's saying, truth. And it's just some nonsense. We never lost anything ever. We're winners, America. Yeah, that's basically all they bring to the table to try and convince you that nothing is happening. And that's what they did, by the way, over a week ago now, when the Iranians claimed to have hit El-Tenf, a base in El-Tenf in Syria, and inflicted casualties amongst U.S. forces. And CENTCOM comes out and says there are no casualties whatsoever, none. And then a few days later, they're admitting that 4 American soldiers died, 3 of them in an attack on a base in Jordan. There's a dozen or so injured in that attack on the base in Jordan. And then suddenly we've got the Pentagon coming out and admitting to the Wall Street Journal that nearly 100 are injured. And then those deaths, those 4 deaths, were removed from the Iran war death toll. So it went from 18 that they've admitted to 14, and 270 injuries that were announced in this latest period of escalation with Iran. They were also put on a separate list. So, you can take what you want from that, and then you can look at the satellite imagery. I mean, all of this satellite imagery that we keep showing and bringing up here on this show week after week. Now, you can say that some of it, maybe they missed in this case or that case, but the Iranians make a claim, They claim that they targeted something very specific in a hangar or, troop housing. They took something out on the runway, whatever it may be, a radar. And then suddenly there is imagery, satellite imagery to back this up, or there are fires burning from these sites. CENTCOM says nothing's happening. We never lost anything. No aircraft were lost. No soldiers were injured. And then slowly information starts leaking afterwards. And of course, this is very embarrassing for them, but they don't have a strategy. They have no strategy whatsoever. And they are only fighting this because Israel keeps encouraging it. And we're going to get into what is currently going on, because since our last show on Monday, there has been a dramatic escalation across the region. So one of those escalations occurred in Iraq, and Saudi Arabia teamed up with the United States to bomb military sites throughout Iraq and to assassinate and kill members of the Popular Mobilization Units, the PMU, or the Hashid al-Sha'bi. And of course, the Hashid are integrated to a large extent with the Iraqi army, the Iraqi security forces. So these are bases that oftentimes bases with assets and soldiers who are not actually only PMU. But what also occurred here was these US Saudi strikes that took place killed 5 Iranians as well. And it's no secret that these Iraqi groups are aligned with Iran, because ultimately what happened is, we hear now all of this rhetoric about the terrorist organizations in Iraq and how they have to be disarmed, like Hezbollah has to be disarmed, right? So these organizations were created. They sometimes called them Shia militias. They sometimes call them Iranian proxies and all of this. They were created by Iran, really. Let's be honest. They were created by Iran and with the guidance of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iraq, because ISIS emerged and took over large swaths of the country. And in order to fight against ISIS, they created these Iraqi militia groups. And there's a number of them, a large number of different militia organizations. So one of the biggest figures in creating those groups was Qasem Soleimani, who Donald Trump ordered his assassination in 2020, which was that then brought on the first ever Iranian attack on a US base using its ballistic missiles. Those groups were created to combat ISIS because Iran saw ISIS as a strategic threat to itself. And obviously it doesn't want its holy sites falling to these lunatics who would definitely go into Karbala and to Najaf and these areas that are important to the Shia and massacre them, because they were just massacring the Shia, massacring anyone who was not of their specific understanding of Sunni Islam. And people probably know they took people as slaves, and there's all sorts of different horrifying crimes that they committed. But the US brags that it was behind and responsible for destroying ISIS. The reality is all of the work on the ground was done by these Iraqi militias. And afterwards, they were there. Obviously, they have this affiliation to Iran. And now it's like, oh, well, Iran has such a massive influence in Iraq and they're so corrupt and all of this and all of these officials. The United States created the current confessionalist government inside of Iraq. The United States is the one that corrupted the country, that tore the country apart, created a new government, and came in, by the way, because now they sell this lie about sectarianism. The sectarianism didn't exist, at least in the way that it does in its current form, before the Americans came in and overthrew Saddam Hussein. The explicit sectarian violence. Now, Saddam Hussein did go and massacre different sects within the country, but as we know it now, the Sunni-Shia divide, Iraq is a majority Shia country. It was run by a Sunni leader who was he was a Ba'athist, right? That was his party, which is the same party in name. Obviously, the ideology is a little bit different. That Bashar al-Assad in Syria was a part of. They were Baathists. Different. They hated each other, but nonetheless, this was their movement. So the United States, after putting Saddam Hussein in power originally, comes in, removes Saddam Hussein from power, and then puts in a confessionalist government, which is now the Shia government. They allow Al-Qaeda and later ISIS to emerge. All of these people come out of like Camp Bucca and all of these places, their detention facilities, and end up including Jolani, who was there and detained by the Americans, or Ahmed al-Shara now, the current self-declared president of Syria, right? They were all there under American detention, just happened to get out and then just start taking over land and having these, all of these SUVs that are just provided to them out of nowhere. And suddenly they've got an army of 30,000 people, which would take a long time to mobilize. But, forget all those questions, but it was the United States that destroyed the country and then rebuilt the country. And then through soft power institutions, decided that it would maintain its power for its NGOs, all of the money that it brings in, the people it bribes, and the corruption it has created. And then Iran is like, well, this is our next door neighbor, and there's ISIS emerging here, and they have obviously a religious affiliation with many of the Iraqis, and they create connections there. I mean, that was naturally going to happen. But people make it seem as if it's this big, grand conspiracy of the Shia versus the Sunni, almost forgetting that the Sunni leader, and I say it like that because to call him a leader as if Sunni was like the core identifying factor of Saddam Hussein and his leadership is utterly ridiculous. But the technically Sunni leader of Iraq was removed because the United States used the Sunni countries of the Gulf to launch their invasion, right? But we're supposed to believe in all of this sectarian nonsense. So now there's this Saudi-US airstrike campaign across Iraq, and they've killed dozens of members of the PMU, which again, the PMU were formed in order to combat ISIS and destroy ISIS, and they did. The US did airstrikes, but the US allowed ISIS to flourish, realistically. Why? Because they wanted to continue their campaign. What was it? Operation Inherent Resolve. I'm forgetting all of the different operation names off the top of my head, which, enables them to say that they're still in the region because they're combating ISIS and terrorism and all of the rest of it. And there's a whole legal mumbo jumbo, which ISIS allowed them to use as an excuse to continue operating in the region, continue to keep their forces in northeastern Syria for a very long time, to continue to have their presence in Al-Tanf in Syria. And then eventually now, of course, they've captured Syria. Syria is their friend, right? They control Syrian territory now. But this brand new war that's been opened is not simply going to pass. So, of course, the Iraqi government, its prime minister, Ali Zaidi, has canceled his official trip to Saudi Arabia, but there's some tension between the Iraqi prime minister and the Islamic resistance in Iraq, which is the name that's used as an umbrella organization for a number of different organizations, including those PMU groups, but there's also the likes of Awliya ad-Dam, which translates to the Guardians of the Blood, And that's like a newer organization that was formed, I believe, around 2020. That's when we first sort of started hearing about them. And they have their own, missile and drone capabilities, and they sort of fall under this banner of the Islamic resistance in Iraq. And they have said that their response is inevitable against Saudi Arabia, and that they're giving a deadline to the Iraqi government to respond itself. Now, what sparked this is that the Saudis claim that an attack was launched by Iraqi factions against their oil facilities. Now, they initially denied that anything was hit, right, in the east of their country. But there was evidence to suggest that one of the biggest processing facilities in Saudi Arabia was actually struck. We know this from NASA firms and some, photographic evidence that emerged that appeared to confirm something was struck. We don't know precisely what happened, but there was a drone attack that took place. Now, the Saudis again say nothing happened, but then launched this massive wave of strikes alongside the United States on Iraq, while the Iraqi government has declared to them that they are investigating what happened. Later on, there's claims that the Yemenis were the ones to do it. Ansar Allah was the one to launch it, and Yemen claims responsibility for all the attacks on Saudi Arabia. Now Saudi is spinning the narrative that Yemeni forces launched the drones from inside Iraqi territory, but they did it in coordination with the PMU groups, and the IRGC of Iran was aware of it. So basically a way of just saying, yeah, nothing happened. There was a drone strike, but nothing happened and nothing was hit. That's why we had to bomb all these sites throughout Iraq. And now Yemen is claiming it, but we're just going to say that Yemen did it from inside of Iraqi territory, but also the PMU are actually responsible, and the same with the IRGC for an attack that never did anything because we shot down all the drones. Doesn't make any sense, of course. So evidently a successful drone operation. That's what I take from this. And they have launched this massive attack, but that is not going to end there. So the Iraqis can potentially get into a war with the Saudis. And the Saudis, of course, are in the camp of the United States and the Israelis. This is another expansion of the war. So the Saudis are now at war with Yemen. They're on the verge of a proper war with Iraq as well. And the United States are courting them. They want to bring them on for a normalization deal with the Israelis. And the way that they want to set that up is they want to secure a nuclear program for the Saudis, and in exchange, they normalize ties with the Israelis. And we'll get a little bit more into that. But one of the main stories that has emerged today is that there was a drone strike. This was actually yesterday. There was a drone strike that hit these ships that were docked in what's being called a Mediterranean port here in Egypt. And these are U.S. ships that are storage tankers for fuel, for oil. And they were hit, and there were these massive fires that raged on by drones. That's what's been concluded by the authorities in Cairo. Immediately, Iran and Yemen were blamed. It's unclear exactly what happened. So this is the area here where in Damietta, where the storage facilities were hit. And of course, this is close to the Suez Canal. And you would think that perhaps Yemen is maybe the most likely candidate, as they have actually used drones to hit Tel Aviv before. They sent them through the Sinai and they struck targets in Tel Aviv. So they have successfully done that before. However, something very interesting occurred because, of course, this means if there's an attack on Egyptian territory and they blame this on Yemen or they blame this on Iran, then the war expands into North Africa now. And that's exactly what Israel wants. Remember, in our last episode, we covered an attack in the northern Caspian Sea from the Ukrainians on an Iranian vessel, which killed one Iranian. Iran was threatening to respond to that. And then it appeared as if Ukraine backed off and claimed that, I think they tried to blame it on Russia. But it appeared as if Ukraine was offering to pay for the damages. So they backed off for whatever reason. Perhaps the United States didn't want things to escalate from there and they told them to back off. But we see these incidents keep occurring in the Caspian Sea, possibly dragging in the Ukrainians. So you've dragged Europe into the war. Suddenly there's an attack that's happening here in Egypt. And Abbas Araghchi, who's the foreign minister for Iran, has now openly accused the Israelis of carrying out a false flag operation against in Egyptian territory against U.S. ships, which is a serious charge. And also it would be a lot easier for the Israelis to pull this off, quite frankly. But it's impossible to know whether the Israelis are actually behind this or not at this point. I don't think there's enough evidence. But that is what Iran is suggesting, that the Israelis may have pulled off a false flag attack. Now, the reason why, if we're going to go with this hypothetically, that the Israelis might want to do this, is the same reason, again, we're seeing all these flare-ups here between Ukraine and Iran. They're expanding this war on almost every front imaginable. Suddenly now Saudi Arabia could be at war with Iraq. Yemen has, and this is on Iran's side that this expanded, and also best opportunity for them to do this, but Yemen ended its ceasefire with the Saudis and imposed a blockade because on Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia imposes a blockade on them and has done since the year 2015, which has inflicted great suffering on the people of Yemen. In fact, around 400,000 people have died. The majority of them died because of the blockade. People starved to death. They had preventable, they died from preventable diseases. So Yemen has escalated. So Yemen is at war with Saudi Arabia. Iraq is about to be at war with Saudi Arabia as well, potentially. Iran, of course, is at war with the United States and the Israelis. There's no actual real ceasefire at this time. There might be on and off strikes that are ongoing, but there's no ceasefire. There's no memorandum of understanding. Nothing has been agreed to by both sides. So there is actually no ceasefire between Iran and the United States and the Israelis. So all of these bases throughout the Persian Gulf and Jordan are getting hit. The United States is still pushing the Syrians to invade Lebanon. Of course, the Israelis are occupying South Lebanon, and they continue to try and push forward. Actually, that's something that I wanted to cover, because the Israelis attempted again to advance in South Lebanon. And as a result, this is the footage that emerged that allegedly depicts the vehicle on fire. Hezbollah detonated an IED, either an IED or an explosive drone. The reporting was mixed on what it actually was, against an Israeli military vehicle that attempted to advance in the Aliyah Tahir area that Israel repeatedly tried to capture. Technically, we still have a so-called ceasefire there. Israel is also bombing Gaza frequently. It committed another civilian massacre. I can't show that footage because this video will be taken down from YouTube if I show the images that emerged from Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip yesterday, because Israel, of course, did its specialty and massacred a bunch of children. So yes, I can't show that on here, but they have been continuing their civilian massacres. and trying to drum up excuses to commit more attacks where they kill around a dozen Palestinians every single day. The settler attacks in the West Bank have gone insane. It's escalating in every conceivable way that we could see. To the point now where, and was interesting, this emerged today, that hundreds of Jordanians, prominent Jordanians, so you had like political figures, lawyers, everyone you can think of, different personalities who signed on to a open letter demanding the withdrawal of US forces from Jordan. But as you probably remember, if you've been watching these streams, Jordan says that there are no US bases inside of their country. US forces are just there because they're their friends, I guess, right? There's no US bases, and we don't have US forces inside of Jordan. I guess those US air defense systems that are flying up, failing, and, impacting civilian buildings and areas and killing Jordanian citizens that you cover up, they're just imagined, right? The people are, I don't know, like just evaporating, I guess. Anyway, talking about like ridiculous lies and goofy nonsense, what I'd pull this up before we get into perhaps some more serious stuff here and why everything is expanding in the region, what direction it's going in as well, because obviously things are heating up on all of these different fronts. We're seeing that these back and forths between the US and Iran are happening, and making sense of it. We'll go into that more. But first, here's the Clown Prince, who apparently, according to some sources, is thinking of hanging up the gloves. He's had enough, he's sacrificed enough, going on and getting humiliated publicly for long enough. But the failed offspring of the former Iranian dictator, the Shah, was asked about his credentials publicly. And here's what he had to say.
Autocratic rule. What qualifications do you believe you have to lead a transitional government in Iran?
Well, if an attorney decides to take a case pro bono, does this mean that he doesn't have a job? I've been doing this voluntarily for free for 4 decades. Right. As my sacrifice for the sake of my country. I could have easily decided back in Cairo when my father passed away, you know what, to hell with it. I can pursue, like many others, a life, business, other things, not that I didn't have connections, not that I didn't have people, but I decided to stay in it for the sake of my country, that I think in terms of civilization, in terms of culture, in terms of what they can offer the world, deserve much better than this regime and this government. So it's been a personal sacrifice for a lifetime.
I know he uses the attorney example here, but an attorney normally has qualifications. So like that's what they're asking you about, not whether you're doing it pro bono or not, whether you have qualifications. And imagine like that sort of an answer, right? If you're like laying there, you're about to get open heart surgery, and you just jokingly ask, like, so what are your qualifications? And the surgeon is like, I've sacrificed my whole life for this moment. This is what I am destined to do. And it's like, okay, all right. And I've done it for free, pro bono. It's like, you're a surgeon, right? Like you have qualifications, you've done this before? No, but this is my moment. It's like, get me off the operating table. But this guy clearly doesn't know what he's doing. This is his answer. Because again, he doesn't have any experience. But this is the goofiness that we are given of somebody that is to lead Iran. And the reason why this goofy figure is presented to us as the alternative for Iran by the Israelis is completely an Israeli creation. Otherwise, this guy just sits at home eating hamburgers and, getting slaves to fan him as he sits in his multi-million-dollar mansion in the United States and just chills his whole life, right? Like, that's him. Okay, so this guy just pops up a few years back, and suddenly the Israelis have pumped all this money into him and a campaign to prop him up and make him seem like he has some sort of support. And then these kooky weirdos in the Persian diaspora start supporting him because they want freedom, and they want a freedom from a dictator and democracy from a hereditary monarchy. It makes complete sense, right? Like, so these people are very logical that support the Shah's son. But yeah, I thought I'd play that because that's, I don't know, a bit of comedy for the day before we get into more serious stuff. So talking about all of this, because of course the whole point of them using this buffoon, the Israelis propping up this buffoon, is because they want to stir division, right? Stirring division inside of Iran. They want to destroy the country. And that's why they use people like this, people with no qualifications, people who cannot possibly lead a country and know nothing about leading a country and are not serious and can never unite people. The reason why they do that is because the aim with Iran is not to clear out the Iranian government, replace it with a strong Iranian government that is just pro-what. They want Iran destroyed. They want Iran destroyed. And they know that the support base of the Islamic Republic is not going to lay down and just take it, that they're going to fight. They want them destroyed economically. That's why they're pushing the United States, and they continue to have the US bomb and openly threaten going after civilian infrastructure. That's what Trump is doing all the time, talking about bridges, power plants, water desalination, all of that, talking about going after that. And in the midst of all of this, we now have these new fronts opening again, and all of this sectarian hatred being whipped up. And I've spoken about this before, but it's important to understand why they're doing this and why they are creating this axis, right? Which they will call, and we started hearing about this back in 2019. There was a conference in Warsaw, I believe, that happened, and they started mentioning this, but then they started developing it. And that's the Sunni-Israeli alliance, right? That's what they wanted in the region, that the Israelis, the United States, and the Sunni powers would ally against Iran. And so they started pushing, of course, for this alignment. And this alignment was to happen because of the Shia wanting to take over. They have the Shia Crescent, which was, looking at a map, they argued that that existed. Here, we'll just pull that up. So they argued that there was a Shia Crescent, which went over, at the time, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, right? So all of this here was what Netanyahu called the nightmare because of the Iraqi militias. Bashar al-Assad, of course, allowed the Iranians to operate inside of Syria and to arm the Palestinian resistance and the Lebanese resistance. And so because of that, this was what Netanyahu wanted to destroy. And the dream was presented always as what are described as the Sunni states, right? We want Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, right? And he hoped that normalization could spread, that all of these countries could normalize ties with the Israelis. But it went a step further than that, because they wanted to create something that is called the Arab NATO, where all of these countries in the region would combine with the Israelis in a joint military pact eventually, which would act as a regional NATO kind of organization. And that was the goal. And all of this seemed to have been developing, by the way, in 2023. So here you see, and this is the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. This is a think tank, right? So they're talking about the problems with the Sunni and Shia aligning, right? They want them to be rivals, and they're talking here about this phenomenon in which Sunni and Shia, or Shiite, rivals temporarily align, does not stem from a sudden ideological shift or sympathy for the clerical regime. Rather, it reflects deep concern over the consequences of another successful US-Israeli military action against Iran, one that could dramatically strengthen Israel's position as a dominant regional power, increase the likelihood of a new Iran, and thereby undermine the standing of the Gulf states and Turkey. So, why is it mentioning all of this? Because they've played this Iran versus the world strategy for a long time. And now they're concerned that there is realignment that has gone on, and there is cooperation between the Iranians and what they are calling the Sunni powers in the region. So Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of these relations. And the Israelis in their think tanks, they speak about this, and they're very much opposed to this. The reason for that is, of course, this undermines them. They want what they call a new Iran, which is a destroyed Iran. They want an Iran which is like Libya, completely destroyed, sectarian violence and strife, no strong government, just gutted. And the whole purpose of this is that the Israelis want to be the center of the region. And this is no secret. The Israelis want Iran gutted, and also they want, and this is the thing, you may have heard about them, Turkey and how they hate Ankara and they hate Erdogan, and they want to oppose the Turkish military and its Ottoman expansionism and all of this. The reason why they're talking about that is because they know that they have to weaken, like really, Erdogan is never going to attack Israel and destroy Israel. Qatar is never actually going to take any steps really against Israel. They bombed Doha. There were some threats made. They never followed up and did anything. The most they do is provide anti-Israeli media coverage. That's what they do, right? They even allow Israelis to travel over to Doha, right? During the World Cup, Israelis were able to travel over to Doha, right? There's no actual real threat there. The threat that the Israelis are interpreting here is that there are the likes of Qatar and Turkey under Erdogan, and that they have slightly different interests, and that they may cause small little problems for them here and there, and they will stop their program and have significant influence in places like Syria. By the way, they have significant influence right now. They have the ability to mess up some of their plots and schemes. So what have the Israelis been doing? Well, you'll see that in 2023, and this goes back to the Biden administration, so stick with me here because this is going to start to make a lot of sense if you don't already know this information. So in 2023, we officially heard what there have been whispers of for a few years at that point, and that's the revival of the old Hijaz Railway, right? And what they called it in this case is the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. This was revealed at a G20 summit, which was held in New Delhi. And the Biden administration was bragging about this. This happened, and this was announced in early September of 2023. So keep that in mind, early September 2023. Later in September, Netanyahu's pulled up this map, and you'll see what he's noting here. Then the line he's drawn up, this is him at the United Nations General Assembly, where he gives his speech, and he talks about the new Middle East. And what is the new Middle East? The new Middle East is talking about this trade corridor that he wants to be inaugurated. And at the center of all of this, of course, is Saudi Arabia. Because if you look at this map here, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, occupied Palestine, and then Greece. And I believe there's a pit stop in Cyprus, that they want Cyprus involved in this, right? So that's what they wanted to achieve. And lo and behold, there is this new axis that has been formed in the past year or so between the Israelis, the Greek government in Cyprus, where they're all signing on to joint agreements. They're increasing their and created a trilateral pact, increasing their security coordination and defense coordination, and actively pushing back against the Turkish government as well. This is a real alliance that has been drawn up. And again, we circle back to 2023, September. Now, all of this was supposed to go on. Saudi Arabia at that point was pretty much there. This was the big goal of the Biden administration. And as I talked about in our last stream, the Biden administration had a problem. They knew that if Saudi Arabia was going to normalize ties with the Israelis, then Iran could perhaps intervene in some way, and it might even collapse relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. China had brought them together and achieved a rapprochement between the two of them, because of course they didn't have diplomatic ties. The Saudis were responsible for running, Iran International, this ridiculous anti-Iranian media outlet that now is basically controlled by the Israelis. But it ran that. It would constantly agitate against the Iranians. The Iranians hated Saudi. There was a drone strike once on Saudi oil facilities. They had a lot of tension for a lot of reasons. I won't get into that too much. So the Biden administration came in having failed to actually achieve a nuclear deal, which his administration pledged that it would do if he was elected. He failed to achieve a nuclear agreement, in large part because of the pressure of the Israel lobby. And, it was sort of acknowledged that it wouldn't get through Congress, right? That the Israel lobby was not going to let any Iran nuclear agreement get through Congress. And of course, they weren't able to achieve what Obama did in 2015. So instead, they did this mutual prisoner exchange, and at the same time released a bunch of Iranian frozen assets, or committed to do so. And it was basically a soft agreement, where it was not an official nuclear agreement, but it was, we'll ease off with the sanctions, we'll allow some frozen assets to be released to you, just chill, basically. And the reason for that is because they wanted Saudi to normalize with the Israelis. Because if they want this new trade route, which of course competes with China's trade route, the middle corridor, which runs through here and includes the Turkish government, right? Turkey is a big part of the middle corridor. This is all about competition. It's all about a brand new strategy, because the Biden administration, they were looking to open this new trade route, have the normalization agreement between the Saudis and the Israelis, and then October 7 happened. And it messed up all of their plans, because they completely ignored the Palestinian people. So the consequence and the disruption of this entire agenda was the Qassam brigades of Hamas launching an attack on the Israelis on October 7, 2023. Up until that point, Saudis were on the verge of normalizing. The whole world had forgotten about the Palestinians. In 2018, the Palestinians came out during the Great Return March, peacefully demonstrated along the perimeter of the besieged Gaza Strip, and were gunned down to the tune of over 300 innocent people murdered in over just around a year and a half in total, with tens of thousands wounded, and nothing. No reaction. Nobody cared. Nobody did anything. In fact, it just appeared as if the Saudis were going to abandon what's known as the Arab Peace Initiative of the early 2000s. The Arab Peace Initiative was that, and it was joined by all of these Arab and Muslim countries, was, we'll recognize Israel if there is a two-state solution on the 1967 borders, Jerusalem as Palestine's capital, and or East Jerusalem, sorry, in this case, the typical two-state solution model, and then we'll recognize. But this is an abandonment of that, what was happening. So they're completely abandoning the Palestinians. They're allowing the Israelis to slowly push the Palestinians off of their land and to find a solution that just isolates them into these ever-shrinking ghettos where they just languish. The Gaza Strip by the year 2020, according to UN experts, was considered unlivable, right? It's like 97% of the water was undrinkable at that time before October 7. So they wanted to hatch this. They wanted this to be part of what Biden called his PGII, which was to replace the Build Back Better World project, right? Now Trump, has his own phrases and whatever, but basically what we see is it's a very similar strategy. The strategy here is not so much that the US government has to directly invest in all these projects, but that these corporations, these multinational corporations, are going to be the ones that invest in all of this. They invest in infrastructure projects. It's, when it comes to security, you're outsourcing it. You collaborate with the likes of Amazon, right? Or Palantir, and all of these different multinational corporations, big tech, everything. And the idea here is, in a way, aligned with the World Economic Forum's strategy of stakeholder capitalism. And so the Biden administration, when it was initially pushing for this model that you're seeing on screen, which Trump is also now pushing for. And by the way, the Biden administration wanted to give Saudi Arabia a nuclear program in exchange, and a defense pact in exchange for it normalizing with the Israelis. So it's the exact same thing. Biden and Trump, exact same thing. The only difference here is the Biden administration said no to our war with Iran. The Trump administration said, how high do you want me to jump, right? So that's the key difference between the two of them. But they want corporations to invest. They want corporations to make the decisions. They want corporations to be the ones leading the charge, not the actual government itself. So you have a bunch of all of the intelligent people running these projects are not like Pete Hegseth, like this wimpy guy that was a drunken Fox News host, right? The guys like him and little Marco Rubio and Trump, right? These are not people that are actually running the show. Who's running the show? They're all these guys behind the scenes. That's the whole concept here of what they're trying to implement. It's the other way around from what China does. China's got a strong central government, and it sort of controls that capitalist class. That's what they've implemented, right? And they've managed to be very successful with their Belt and Road initiative. But the United States is the other way around. So while Trump may differ in some very small ways from the Biden administration, they're pretty much the same when it comes to the crux of what they want to do. And now what we're seeing is that all of this has been messed up. And at the center of all of it is Iran. So we have to return again to the nonsense sectarian propaganda of Sunni versus Shia. And now, if you hear what the Israeli think tanks are saying, it's dangerous. The Sunni and Shia are coming together. So what do you do to ensure that the Sunni and Shia fight each other? And this is where we get back to the original point here. Well, what you could do is you could take Saudi Arabia and you could make it go to war with Yemen. Well, Yemen's obviously decided that for itself, but that's not enough to do the Sunni Shia thing, right? Because the Yemeni, the Zaydis, they're not actually very far from Sunni Muslims. They make propaganda about them, but the reality is you can say Iranian-backed Houthi rebels and all of the nonsense you want to say about them, they're not 12 or Shia, right? So it doesn't hit the same, right? They can't make the same excuses about them. So you have to get the real Shia. You have to fight the real Shia here. And the United States and Saudi Arabia team up and they're going to bomb Iraq and fight Iraq. Now, this, again, as we covered in the last show, this could backfire massively, because what happens if you actually do create the war and Saudi Arabia doesn't have a capable military? What it does is it contracts soldiers from Sudan and elsewhere to fight on its behalf half the time because it doesn't want to lose Saudis. And it's not a capable military. All of its equipment, everything comes from the US, all of its intelligence and all the logistics for the war in Yemen always came from the West, right? Britain, the Israelis, the Americans, they're the ones running it. But you start creating all these conflicts, right? So Iraq is attacking Saudi Arabia. The Shia militias are attacking Saudi Arabia at the time where Yemen, which has a just cause, it's been under a blockade since 2015 and had a genocide committed against its people, right? There's less of an argument that people know about Iraq and what's happened there. So you create this problem where it's all the Shia fighting here, and then suddenly the so-called Sunni regime in Damascus is fighting against the Shia in Lebanon as well, right? You have all these fronts that suddenly open up. And if Yemen or Iran attacked Egypt too, like we're hearing happened, then you've got another front that's opened up. Now you're dragging in Sunni Cairo, Sunni Egypt, right? In the minds of people. That's the way that it's going to be portrayed. And of course, these Gulf regimes, what are they going to do with their media, with their clerics that they have? We call them madkhalis, these people that are like subservient to the leaderships in their countries and will never say a bad word about them, you know, bought and paid for sheikhs. And so you create all of this tension, you create all of these wars and all of this killing, you expand on different fronts. And the whole purpose of it is to drag everyone down. And if the war continues between Iran and the United States, all of these Gulf regimes are going to get dragged in. So goodbye Kuwait, goodbye Bahrain, goodbye Qatar, goodbye UAE. You know, if the United States is going to use their territory to destroy Iranian desalination facilities, power plants, and bridges, what do you think Iran is going to do inside of all these countries here? Exactly that, except it will eliminate them. Most of these places will become uninhabitable, at least temporarily. And you've created so much animosity, so much death and destruction, so much killing. And you churn up all of this sectarian nonsense. And it's all, as is obvious, about politics. Because it was the United States that removed the so-called Sunni leader, right, in Iraq. And they removed the Alawi leader in Syria. Now, of course, people will say, well, actually, the Syrian revolution removed Bashar al-Assad. No. What happened is there were sanctions that were placed after a war, which started to tank the economy. The sanctions strangled a government that had a corruption problem. And then that corruption came to the surface and they didn't fight the war. And there was an agreement to freeze the war in Syria with all of those armed groups that were all funded by the West and Gulf states that remained there in Idlib for years as the Syrian government sat there and basically waited and did absolutely nothing and took handouts from different countries. And eventually it was just not enough. And it was easy to buy out their leadership. And that's what happened. That's what happened. The way that the Syrian government fell was because everyone was bought out and they left their posts and they refused to fight. There was no battle to take Aleppo and there was no battle to take Damascus. They simply waltzed right in. Was there a little bit of fighting? Sure, a little bit. Some people resisted, majority didn't. It just fell to pieces. So ultimately, it was a foreign operation to remove a government, and it just took a hell of a long time. And Now you've got a government in Syria, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who again was imprisoned by the Americans and was a former ISIS commander, then a leader of al-Qaeda, then did his own splinter group from al-Qaeda inside of Syria. And then suddenly he's the leader of Syria. Oh, and he's suddenly trying to do an agreement with the Israelis. He's very favorable of the Lebanese regime, which is a US proxy regime next door. And he's praising them after they did their agreement where they acknowledged Israel's existence, which Syria, by the way, actually did before Lebanon. Syria acknowledged Israel's existence in a pact where they pledged that there would be joint economic programs that would be opened. There was this, I don't know if they called it a memorandum of understanding, but it was published by the White House, where it was negotiated between the Syrian regime and the Israelis. And they pledged even economic cooperation. So suddenly, you've got this situation where the Arab NATO is emerging again. Oh, call them the toilet regimes that exist in Syria, in Lebanon. They're wanting to normalize. The Lebanese regime wants to normalize the Syrian regime. And when I call them Lebanese and Syrian, like American proxies, and they're actually proxies. Because, they put on like the display, like, I'm Lebanese and I care for Lebanon and stuff. It's like, your country is being occupied, your people are being killed, and you signed an agreement which prevents you from even appealing at the UN or any international body to get justice for your civilians who are killed, who continue to be killed. An agreement which de facto recognizes an Israeli occupation of the south of your country. An agreement that can only end up, if you implement what you are agreeing to implement on your side, in a civil war. And then next door, the Syrians, who now actually have control, they don't have sanctions anymore, sanctions removed. They have control over their oil and gas resources. They have control over their most fertile agricultural lands. There's still the massive Captagon trade that's ongoing in the country. That hasn't stopped. Still a lot of drug smuggling. Everyone is on their own little islands with their own weapons. There's no actual proper authority, like one gun rules the entire country. That's not what's happening now. And because Trump claims that the whole country is united and has been united under Julani, and that's not actually happened. Everyone has weapons. Everyone's scared of each other. No one trusts anyone. And that's the situation. That's why it's been so easy, for example, for Hezbollah to continue to get weapon supplies into Lebanon, because you just literally pay some random Amul who's standing there, who's got a gun on his hips, right? Or your Afghan soldier that barely speaks any Arabic, who's there manning a checkpoint. You just pay them whatever you have to pay them. And they'll let weapons pass through, they'll let whatever pass through, right? That's the way that this sort of functions, that's the way that it works. And they just collapse these countries. Look at the economy of Lebanon. Now, yes, there's corruption in Lebanon, there's corruption in Syria, there's corruption in Iraq, but are the economies tanked and are the people suffering in the way they are because of corruption only? That's the only thing. Was there no corruption in Syria before 2011 when the war started? No corruption whatsoever. But it had no foreign debt and it was fine. It was cheap. And the people in Jordan and in Lebanon would cross over on the weekends to go for trips to Damascus and to buy goods and to buy groceries even. Because it was so cheap. Because if you know anything about this region, it's the United States and Israel that have destroyed everything. And then they want to sell you this lie about sectarian nonsense. So they want, again, people to fight, and they want to push them towards war. So again, perfect candidate, Saudi Arabia, which they're pulling towards a normalization agreement with the Israelis. They want them to bomb Iraq. They want them to kill Iraqis. And, if you know the history, in 1802, the Wahhabis under like the Saudi leadership, the first Saudi leadership in Najd. They went across the border into Iraq and killed thousands of Iraqis and went into like Karbala and different areas and killed all of these Shia because they're kuffar, they're disbelievers. But remember that these same Saudis that ended up taking over what now they have called Saudi Arabia, just think about that. These people named a country with their family name, right? Right? They did this to Sunni Muslims too. It's the same thing, same justification. Because at the end of the day, it does not matter. It's about politics. Because if it was about Sunni and Shia, then why would Saudi Arabia allow the United States to use its territory as a launching pad to go and take out the Iraqi government under Saddam Hussein? Because Saddam Hussein is a Sunni, apparently. Whoops. Because it has nothing to do with that. But they'll give a religious character to it, and they want to create this fight. They want to create this tension, because ultimately, and this is the worst part of it, ultimately, they want Saudi Arabia to be weak. They want Qatar to be weak. They want even the United Arab Emirates to be weak. They want all of them literally just to be a pit stop. They could not care less about how many of their people die, about how weak they get, about how battered their facilities are. Because at the end of the day, the weaker they are, the more powerful Israel is. That's all they want. Same for the Americans. They don't give a damn about Americans dying. They don't give a damn. And they won't ever tell you the truth about anything. Just so everybody is aware, I did want to present these maps about control in Yemen so everyone's, because I've spoken about this before, so everyone is aware. So this is a map of the control in Yemen. So the Saudi-backed factions technically control, and you might see maps like this pop up, right? So the Saudi proxies control that territory in like the pinky red color there. And then the green is controlled by Ansar Allah. And that may look to some people like, oh, well, like they can't be a legitimate government. They don't have the majority of the country's territory. Now, most of this land is just uninhabited. So I'm showing this just so everyone's aware of who controls what. And here is a map so everyone's aware of where the population of Yemen is actually based. So as you can see, the vast majority of the Yemeni population are in areas controlled by Ansar Allah. Just so everybody is aware, right? It is the government for the largest chunk of the population of Yemen. So I thought that would be interesting to just show and put up here so people have that visual representation of the situation, the population density inside the country, what that actually looks like, so people are aware. Because it is important, and quite frankly, they're just never going to show you this in the corporate media. You're going to hear the Houthi rebels that are the Iranian proxies inside of Yemen, and then you're going to hear about the internationally recognized government, which is a bunch of Saudi proxies, and their so-called president is in Riyadh, not in Yemen, right? It's not an indigenous Yemeni movement. It's a Saudi-backed regime that is trying to be imposed, and the Saudis believed that they would destroy Yemen in a matter of months in 2015. Here they are in 2026. Well, they formed with those GCC allies of theirs and others in the region. Jordan joined in, right? Egypt, I believe, even joined in to destroy Ansar Allah. They combined their forces in an offensive alliance to remove Ansar Allah and to install their puppet regime. And yeah, didn't take a few months. Now they're forming a defensive alliance to try and help them navigate their way through the Red Sea. And another useless alliance, because there was an alliance that was formed under the Biden administration's orders that was set up, a naval alliance to allow for Israeli navigation through the Red Sea. And there were 2 of those different operations that were launched, and both of them failed. Both of them failed. They killed a whole bunch of Yemeni civilians, of course, during these operations. They attacked different sites, and they changed absolutely nothing. And then Trump came in with his bombing campaign and changed absolutely nothing. And now Saudi Arabia is running to its allies. Instead of forming an offensive coalition, now it's a defensive coalition, which is interesting. It's just a representation of what happens to you when you hand over your sovereignty to the United States and Israel. Because Saudi Arabia right now is caught in between a rock and a hard place. Because if the United States wants them to do military action somewhere, and they're saying, hey, you're going to strike this, they're not going to say no. They can't say no. The Saudis can't turn around and tell them to get out of their country. Neither can the Jordanians. Because right now, Jordan, the king in Jordan, King Abdullah II, he's not in a good situation. Like, he's so incredibly paranoid that he's been cracking down on the Muslim Brotherhood and Muslim Brotherhood affiliates, even, going after people in his own, symbolic, I suppose, more than anything, parliament, because they don't have ultimate control to make, decisions there, because, it's headed by a monarch, right? The Hashemites. But he's under a lot of tension. He feels the pressure from his people, and he has done. He's very paranoid. He's been cracking down in his own ways. And I'm sure if he could, and he had the ability to say whatever he wanted and make whatever decision he wanted, the King of Jordan would order the United States to get out. But instead, Jordanian officials will say on his behalf that there aren't even US forces there. This is how ridiculous it is. They just have to lie. Because they don't have autonomy. They've sacrificed their sovereignty by allying themselves with the United States, and you become the US's slave. So when the US has to use your country for something like this, you just have to sit there and watch as missiles fall and interceptors fly into civilian buildings, and your tourism takes a massive hit, and your ports get destroyed, and your military bases get leveled, and your infrastructure takes hits. You just have to watch and take it. Because what are you going to do? Kick out the US? Jordan is basically an intelligence hub for the United States, the Israelis, and the United Kingdom. And they just have to sit there, and the king has to hope, oh my God, I hope we don't lose that much. But he can't do anything, even if he wanted to. The Saudis are the same. All of them are in this exact same position. They can't actually do anything. Because if they did, there's a brother or a cousin in the same family that the US could get on the phone and could come in and cut their head off and remove them. I mean, this is what happens in these kingdoms, right? Is they use another member of the family. That member of the family comes in and murders whoever they have to murder in order to take over the position. And they know that. They can be replaced in 5 seconds. They can't trust anyone. And this is your fate when you sell out to the United States. That's what happens. You don't last in the end. You don't last in the end. It's always going to come back to bite you. Saddam Hussein, for example, he did everything the US asked him. He went to war with Iraq, and he even tried to he got basically approval from the United States to invade Kuwait. Then when he invaded Kuwait, suddenly the US changed their mind, and they decided to go and kill 100,000 people and make up all of these nonsense stories about, babies in incubators and all of the rest of it, and sell it to their population. And then later on, of course, they've got to put their sanctions on, and they've got to, you know, kill hundreds of thousands of children inside of Iraq. And then they have to, you know, go in all guns blazing into Baghdad, remove the Iraqi government, destroy the country, topple it completely, all under the justification of 9/11 and Al-Qaeda, which Saddam Hussein hated and killed if they came anywhere near his country, and, you know, weapons of mass destruction and nonsense. And again, we have this situation that just plays out in every country in the region in just a different form. New stupid excuses, new sectarian excuses, and infighting between groups. And I'm not saying there's not bad blood between groups of people. There is. But it's unnecessary. It's manufactured. And Syria is one of the worst examples of it. Like all these blood feuds that get created. And now, right now, we still have these people killing each other all the time over nonsense. And blaming the Shabiha, the supporters of the old regime in Syria, right? The Shabiha, which basically is just a euphemism for the Alawi at this point, most of the time, right? They want to kill people that, and the Alawi, so people are aware, the Alawi are not like this mega rich population inside of Syria, just so everyone is aware of this. That group that exists almost exclusively in Syria, and some of them are in Turkey as well, okay? But they live along the coast, a lot of them. And there's all of this stuff said about them because obviously Bashar al-Assad and Hafiz al-Assad were part of this, like, probably disrespectful to call it a cult, but it's like a splinter group which it split off of the Ismaili segment of the Shia side of the Islamic faith, right? But as I've explained before, it's a very different faith than like Shia Muslims, like mainstream 12 or Shia Muslims or the Yemeni and what they believe. It's nothing to do with that. But they live anyway along the coast for the most part. Some of them live in Turkey, and of course as well because of the war, many have fled, and since, you know, the fall of the government, many more have fled. So there's a bunch in Lebanon as well, and, you know, they've moved elsewhere, right? But this is a group of people that originally they were Christians in the area, but many of them are poor. Not all of them are a bunch of rich people. Now, what they get blamed for is because a bunch of people from this sect in Syria were in prominent positions within the government of Bashar al-Assad. So a lot of them were in very high positions, where the rank and file, like in the Syrian Arab Army, in the intelligence services, the rank and file, the people who are basically doing all the killing and everything else, right? All the torture that people talk about, most of them were the people doing it, physically doing it, were Sunnis, right? But the people at the highest positions, a bunch of them were, Alawi. But that doesn't represent the vast majority of the Alawi people. But again, in this context, they brought in now along the border, you know, these border checkpoints and these checkpoints that pop up in Syria. You've got like Afghans and Uzbeks and Uyghurs and these people who are manning checkpoints and randomly pulling people over and asking them what their religion is and all of this nonsense, right? People that don't know the first thing even about their own religion, but they have this weird warped version of the Islamic faith where for them, like anyone that slightly deviates from their very, let's say non-mainstream, very, like in terms of Islamic history, they are a small minority of, in terms of the scholars and people who actually thought like this, a very, very fringe group. But all these people took that ideology of this fringe group of what we can call Wahhabis, right? They call themselves Salafists. The Salafists are like, they're following the way of the Salaf, they say, which is like the early Muslims. This is just in a nutshell. So they call themselves Salafists. And really, they're Wahhabis, right? So they have the ideology and all of the excuses and all of the nonsense from the ideology that came from Najd in Saudi Arabia, right? Like that's this region that's now in Saudi Arabia. And this same ideology enabled these people to come over and take Mecca and take Medina and kill all of the clerics and the religious people there, right? To kill anyone and then force them to convert to what they saw as Islam, right? At the time, even though they were under Ottoman rule and they were actually Muslims, but they saw them as non-Muslims because of their teachings that they were operating out of. This is like the foundational ideology of the Saudi state, by the way, which of course Saudi Arabia is best friends with the United States and the British and stuff like that. The Saudi royals are celebrated because that ideology, and by the way, for these people that hate Muslims, this is something to think about. This ideology, which is espoused by Al-Qaeda and Daesh, these groups, like the worst examples of extremist Muslim groups that anyone will ever point to, that ideology, there's no surprise that Donald Trump is standing next to a former Al-Qaeda leader, because that ideology that enabled Al-Qaeda, that enabled Daesh, ISIS, that ideology came from what is now Saudi Arabia. That came from the Saudis, who basically used the Wahhabi ideology, the ideology created by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, used that ideology to go and kill other Muslims. So for them at that time, it was the Ottomans. They also went in the early 1800s, and they went into Iraq in 1802, I believe it was. They went and killed thousands of people in Iraq. They went into Karbala and all of that, right, which is a holy place for the Shia. And this ideology enabled them to go, the Ottomans are not Muslims because of a religious disagreement with the Ottomans. Ottomans were Sunni, by the way, right? Like they were classified as Sunnis. But they weren't Muslim because of a disagreement. They found something, which I'm not going to get too much into, but basically they claimed that they worshipped graves, right? And they worshipped the grave of the prophet, and there's this whole thing which I'm not going to get into because it's a bit long to understand, but that's the excuse that they use to basically say all of these people here need to be fought. We're allowed to, sack their areas. We're able to kill religious leaders. We're able to, collectively punish people and then get them to pay us taxes, right? And then later on, because these people we're fighting are non-Muslims, because we've decided they're non-Muslims because they don't follow Islam exactly how we think it should be followed, right? Again, it's a political thing. It's not actually an Islamic thing. Just looking at this as a matter of history, it's always a political thing. Now, in the minds of the actual people holding the swords or the guns, right, or strapping on the vest, it's a religious thing to those people, but they're just being duped. They're the useful idiots for the cause. So the Saudis wanted to take over territory. They initially used that ideology to do that and fight the Ottomans. And then the Saudis are like, well, we're going to ally with the British. So the British are like, great, we're going to ally with the Saudis. So the Saudis go, how do we justify going and attacking the Ottomans and fighting other Muslims on behalf of non-Muslims for the goals of non-Muslims? How do we do that? Because we want to take our territory and control our territory and strike a deal with them. How do we do that? Oh, here's our little loophole that we're going to use. They're non-Muslims because of X, Y, Z, right? So that same ideology of the loophole, if we find a little loophole, right? The Shia are this, blah, 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 right? The Shia are different, right? Like any group that is different. So because they're different, and even other Sunni Muslims, those Sunni Muslims don't agree. Those Sunni Muslims are not doing what you want to do. Wipe them out, kill them, because they're not Muslims. And this is not a consensus view in the Islamic world, nor has it ever been a consensus view that you can just deem entire populations of Muslims as non-Muslims. That's never been the case. And to say that you can go over there and kill them and fight them because you disagree with them, this is not something that has been the consensus. But these groups are always allied with who? They're the ones that are saying this, the ones that represent all of the stuff that is passed around by your Tommy Robinson types and all of these people that talk about the bad Muslims and doing all of this and all of the rest of it. All of these ones, all of these people, all of these groups, who are they backed by every single time? Well, it's MI6 agents. It's CIA agents that are helping get these fighters into Syria to fight their wars for them. Who helped create Al-Qaeda and the Taliban through the Mujahideen in Afghanistan? And those two splinter groups, who led to that? Who fueled that? Again, the Saudis are involved with the British and the Americans, and the Israelis have an involvement too. And now openly, Trump can stand next to the former head of Al-Qaeda in Syria and brag about how he's a tough guy. And the guy that still has, reportedly, if he believes anything, right? I don't know. If he still has this ideology that he had the whole entire time, he still believes the same thing. And he can justify that by saying, yeah, I'm allied with the people of the book if push comes to shove. I need to build my country, and I'm doing it by allying with the people of the book. And we need to do like this strategy and make himself to be Salah ad-Din. We're going to liberate Jerusalem one day, guys. And it's got a religious coating to it. But the reality is it's political. And if you want people to do things for you in a committed way, use religion to do it. That's what they've done. They use religion, they pervert religion, and they get people to fight. And it's never about the actual religious belief. That's a very important thing to understand here. It's never about the actual religious belief. All it is about getting groups to fight each other and creating nationalist tribes within those different sects of the same belief. It's nationalism, tribalism in a religious sense, right? It's that same tribalistic tendency that you're fueling up as if you get two villages and you get them to fight each other, right? You get a family and you split the family in half and you get them competing and killing each other and fighting each other. The same principle. Now you can give them an ideology, it helps. So that's what you do. You split them, and a religious ideology is probably the best way to get them to fight in a committed way if they think about it in those terms. So that's what we see churned up, and that's what we see this nonsense being all about. But we've been on here for quite some time now, and of course things are heating up. We went through quite a bit of ground here, so I'm hoping that everyone has so far. If you're still watching this stream, you've enjoyed it. And if you have, please do put a comment down below. If you're watching the YouTube, hit that bell because we are getting heavily censored, and hit the like button. We're also looking for 300 new members. We do appreciate everyone who has joined, but we're trying to get to that target so we can keep this show on air, hopefully get all of the footage, all of the imagery, everything that's coming out that we can show you, provide all of the evidence and analysis, the latest that's coming out, and make sure that everyone is up to date. So if you do like the show, please do join as a member. If you can't do that, hit that like button and, of course, comment. And we will see you next Monday, same place, same time. So thank you to everyone for joining today. And we will continue to monitor everything. If you want those live updates, you can go to our Telegram and our X account. We will have our live social media coverage if you want to know what's going on a more immediate basis. But until next time, thank you to everybody for being in here today. And we will see you on Monday, 4 p.m. CST.